At least now they do. Let's go to Numbers chapter 16. I want to talk about an incident that occurred in the life of Moses um, that I was kind of amazed that Mike Columbaro's prophecy started out, with humility, because of course Moses, Numbers chapter 12, verse 3, was the most humble man on the face of the earth, and yet we'll see kind of what he has to face and the prideful people that weren't humble and what they brought to the table, and then how God responded. And remember that when we're reading these records, it's God's giving us a microcosm of how things are going to play out. And the manifestations that we're God's. God is the, what did it say? It's my word and my vision that'll carry you. God has given us everlasting life, that kind of thing. God is the one that's directing things and making the rules. So here in Numbers chapter 16, we have Moses, and he's leading the Israelites through the desert. They've already complained about a bunch of stuff. We don't really know how far along in the wilderness wanderings number 16 is. 6 chapters back in Numbers chapter 10, verse 11, we know that they had been wandering for about a year and a month. And then by Numbers chapter 13, when Moses sent out the spies, they had been wandering for about a year and 5 months. So that was Numbers 13. But we don't know in Numbers 14, 15, 16, was it another year that went by or two? My gut feeling is it wasn't much. Probably they were at the end of their second year, maybe in their third year, in their fourth year of the wandering, but I don't think they were far along in their wilderness wanderings. So we'll go to chapter 16, verse 1, and it says, "Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi," and so now we already know at that point that Korah is not a priest, because if he was a priest, he'd be a son of Aaron, but he is a son of Levi. So we know that Korah is a Levite. So he has access to the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, if you will, in ways that other people didn't have. He would be a privileged person in the congregation. So Korah, and then with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. So you have Korah, who's a Levite. You have Dathan, Abiram, and Dathan, Abiram, and On, and they are descendants of Reuben. Reuben was the first, the eldest of Jacob's 12 sons. That's going to come into play a little later in the record. So these four guys have been plotting, and now they've gathered up people. Verse 2, "And they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 rulers of the congregation, chosen from the assembly, men of renown." Now, chosen from the assembly, we're not specifically clear on exactly what that means, but it does mean they had leadership positions. And part of them may have even been some of the people that were chosen among the assembly that got Holy Spirit in Numbers chapter 11. Don't really know, but we do know it says they were men of renown, or as the Hebrew text would say, men of a name. So these guys had a name for themselves in the congregation. They were known, they were powerful, they were important, they were rulers, and they were in the congregation. Verse 3, "And they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron." Now, put yourself in the position of Moses and Aaron. They're wandering through the desert. They're going to be there for 40 years. Why? Because Moses sent spies into the promised land, and the spies came back with an evil report, and the people rebelled, and they wanted to go back to Egypt, and there were all kinds of things that went wrong, but they're wandering in the desert because of the mistakes that they made, and Moses knows it. And so now these guys rise up against Moses and Aaron, and you can, kind of put yourself in the place of Moses just going, now what? because all Moses had done was put up with murmuring and complaining and unbelief ever since they left Egypt. And here these guys rise up against Moses and they say to them, "You take too much on yourself. Since all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is among them. Why then do you lift yourself up above the assembly of Yahweh?" And the question that I asked was, what could they have possibly taken on themselves? They're out there in the desert, they're eating manna. Um, the only thing that Moses, as far as I can see, is doing other than just listening to Yahweh and making sure that the daily sacrifice and the weekly sacrifices and the new moon sacrifices are going on the way they should, which was really Aaron's job as well. That and they're settling disputes if people in the congregation get into a squabble. And here these guys are like, "You take too much on yourselves." Like, what? What? Especially a Levite. Like, what could we be doing here? But this points something out, that when you and I are going through life, dissatisfied people are dissatisfied. If you're a dissatisfied person, you don't need a lot to happen to be dissatisfied. And that's the situation here. And a lot of times if a person is a kind of a dissatisfied, unhappy, trouble causing person, that's the way they're going to be. And we have to deal with that. And I love what goes on here when these guys come together against Moses and against Aaron, who really are doing phenomenal work in keeping the congregation together and making sure that they're inside the will of God. And verse 4 says, when Moses heard this, he fell on his face. And that's a posture of prayer. Moses could have said, "God, I quit," and walked off. God, he could have gotten mad and started screaming and shouting. There's a million different responses that Moses could have done. But like I say, Numbers 12:3 says Moses is the meekest man on the face of the earth. And his first response to, to trouble, to rebellion, is to pray. He falls on his face and he prays and he collects himself. And then it's, this is a great example of something that we know, but it isn't stated in the text, because he fell on his face, he prayed, and then God gave him a word of knowledge. God gave him a revelation. How do we know that? Because verse 5, he obviously gets up and he speaks to Korah and to all his company, saying, "In the morning, Yahweh will show you who are his and who is holy." And how would he know that? He would know that by revelation. And so one of the things that is, again, it's unwritten here, but we see it in trouble. Moses prays and he stays peaceful at this point. A little later, he's going to get a little angry. I don't blame him. But here he's peaceful. He prays. He gets a revelation. Verse 5, he spoke to Korah and all the company, saying, "In the morning, Yahweh will show you who are his and who is holy, and he will declare him near to him." He, God, will declare that one near to him. The one whom he chooses, he will declare to be near to him. And so this was just something that you and I need to be aware of, that it's God who places people in the body as it pleases him, says 1 Corinthians 12. It is God who chose Moses. It is God who chose the priesthood. It's God who set this stuff up. And Korah and his company are just walking by the flesh. And these 250 guys, you know, people are just gullible. I mean, I'm sure these 250 rulers in the congregation, chosen people of a name, they were probably content. They were probably blessed. They were probably, happy to be doing what they were doing, to have their positions of authority, to be able to serve the congregation like that. But then you get somebody like Korah, and he just begins murmuring and disputing and stirring trouble up. And the next thing you have is trouble. And that's the same thing in Hebrews, where it says, you don't let a root of bitterness grow up in your congregation. And that's what happens here. Korah is a root of bitterness in the congregation, and he infects these 250 people. Christ had to put up with this with his apostles. I'm sure that you remember, uh, or I trust you remember, the incident toward the end of Christ's life where a woman had a jar of alabaster ointment that was worth 300 days worth of work. It was worth a lot of money, 300 denarii. A denarius was worth a day's work. And she poured it on Christ's head, and then the disciples were murmuring about it. But if you read all four gospels, actually occurs, the record is in three of the gospels. If you read the three gospels about it, you find that it was Judas. Judas was the one that was upset about it. And then he started talking to the other apostles, and then they got upset about it. And then Christ had to jump in and go, leave her alone. She's done what she could. She's done a good work for me. Let it be. And then, of course, that settled the matter. But it started with Judas. He was the troublemaker. Here, this starts with Korah, and then Korah's talking to some of these other guys, and then these guys are talking to the rulers of the congregation, about, well, I know you've got a rulership position, but look where Moses is. And in that kind of situation, it's amazing the things that fall out of the mind, like who turned the water into blood, who made the frogs come out of the Nile River, who warned you and warned you how to protect your families from the death angel in the night that the firstborn in Egypt died. Who stood on the bank of the Red Sea, held up his staff, and the water split. I mean, hey, any of you 254 guys, 250, and of course the four of those guys, any of you 254 guys think you could have done that? You want to hold up your stick, split the Red Sea, go back to Egypt? Give it a try. It's amazing how blind people become when they're under the influence of murmurers and division causers. And this is something where you and we need to be able to speak into this. And basically Moses is going to do it. So verse 6, do this, says Moses. Take censers, and a censer is like a fire pan, usually with a way of holding it like a little chain or something so you can swing it. Do this. Take censers, Korah and all his company, and put fire in them, which usually was in the form of a charcoal, and put incense on it in the presence of Yahweh tomorrow. And it will be that the man whom Yahweh chooses, he will be holy. You have gone too far, you sons of Levi. And so at this point, then I think that's proper reproof, that you guys need to wake up. You've gone too far. Verse 8, and Moses said to Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi, is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of Yahweh, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them? And that's an important statement. Is it a small thing to you? Have you forgotten how privileged you are to be able to get and go in the presence of Yahweh when the other Israelites, if they walk in without an offering, they are to be put to death? Is that a small thing to you? And again, Moses is trying to wake them up, get them to repent. And that's important. I think it's part of Moses's humility. These guys are in real trouble. They don't know it, but they're taking a stand against God's chosen leader. And they're doing so in a very, very precarious situation when Israel's out in the middle of the wilderness. They're putting a lot of people in danger. They're putting themselves in danger. It's all rooted in dissatisfaction. And frankly, my gut feeling is there's probably demons behind it as well. In verse 10, Moses says, He's brought you near, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you. Would you seek the priesthood as well? And, again, just trying to speak some sense into people. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it doesn't, but it's always good to give it the college try and say, hey, maybe it'll work this time. So he says uh, in verse 11, so it is against Yahweh that you and all your company have gathered together. It isn't against me, it isn't against Aaron. Yahweh put us in this position. You're standing up against him. And then Moses kind of goes, and Aaron, who is he that you murmur against him? And that's really true. Aaron had showed himself to be a fairly weak leader. He absolutely cratered in the incident of the golden calf. Cratered to the people, lied to Moses, and really it's Moses' strength that's keeping the thing together. And so Moses accurately speaks here. Aaron, you're murmuring against Aaron? You got to be kidding me. And then here we go with verse 12. Now, Korah, it's like, okay, couldn't do anything with Korah. Let's try Dathan and Abiram. Remember, they were in verse 1, the sons of Eliab, and they are children of Reuben. Now, what would they be upset about? For Pete's sake, I mean, a Levite, he's already got Levitical privileges, and he's upset because he doesn't get what? Tough to say, but what could Dathan and Abiram be upset about? Well, they're descendants of Reuben. Reuben was the firstborn of Jacob, um, a son of Leah. And it's very possible that's what's going on here is they're thinking we've been usurped. Levi was Jacob's fourth son. It's like, and the Levites who, they're way down the line there, they've kind of taken over and we need more recognition. We need more privilege. We're sons of Reuben. Can't prove it. But my gut feeling is that would have something to do with it. And so in verse 12, Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram. And good for Moses. You got a problem with somebody, but it doesn't say Moses went to Aaron to talk about Dathan and Abiram. He went to them. And that's a great principle. You guys are familiar with that out of Matthew 18, that if you have a problem with somebody, you go to the person. You don't go to your friend or the person's friend, you go to the person. And so Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, we will not come up. And it's, well, they're not nearly as humble or big-hearted as Moses. And then look what they say in verse 13, because this is the lie. And then you wonder, well, they can't be that stupid. They can't be as stupid and as ignorant of history, which they themselves have lived through, to actually say this. So they've got ulterior motives that blind them. They may have satanic possession. It's hard to say, but they say, is it a small thing that you've brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey? Really? That's the way you want to describe Egypt, where you complained bitterly because of your hard bondage, and now you're calling it a land that flows with milk and honey? What in the world kind of reversal is that? But that's typical of the adversary. He throws out these big claims that aren't true and just says them until people believe them. You brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness. Well, actually, I was going to send you into the promised land. You were the guys that came back and said you didn't want to go there. So that's history, Numbers 13, but they've completely turned that around. Then he says, but you must also make yourself the ruler over us. Yes, the ruler. Did Moses promote himself? If I remember Exodus chapter 4, Moses didn't even want to do it. God had to get angry with Moses for Moses to even do it. And then it was, and then Moses went through all the stuff in leading them for months to make sure they got out of Egypt. And then they say in verse 14, moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards, because when the spies came back, they didn't want to go. So and now they're blaming Moses. Great satanic, great satanic principle. Blame someone else for what you did wrong. You'll see it all the time. You follow the newspaper, happens all the time. Blame somebody else for what you did wrong. And so and then they say, will you gouge out the eyes of these men? In other words, you're going to make everybody blind about all this stuff. We will not come up. In verse 15, that that pushed Moses over the edge. He became very angry, and he said to Yahweh, I like, at least he goes and talks to God. Do not do not respect their offering. Not like God would have, but it's interesting that Moses here would want to make sure that there wasn't any confusion among the people. Don't respect their offering. I've not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them, which is exactly true. So then verse 16, so now Moses goes back to Korah. Verse 16, Moses said to Korah, you and all your company, be there before Yahweh, you and they and Aaron tomorrow. So you, Korah, they, Korah, all your companions and company and assembly and Aaron, and every one of us are going to be there before Yahweh tomorrow. Verse 17, and take each man his censer and put incense on them, and each man bring before Yahweh his censer, 250 censers, you also, and Aaron, each his censer. Verse 18, so this is the next morning. So every man took his censer, and they put fire in them and laid incense on them and stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting, as did Moses and Aaron. Verse 19, Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And so, it started with Korah and his three friends, and then they infected 250 others. And now basically everybody's murmuring. Um, so, so something powerful has to happen here to stop this rebellion. Verse 19, they assembled at the tent of meeting. Then the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the congregation. And this literally then above the tent of meeting and in the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, the glory of Yahweh was that bright, glowing cloud that's so brilliant that the priests can't minister in it. And it shows the glory of Yahweh. And so they all are assembling against Moses. And oops, the glory of the Lord appears in the tabernacle. Verse 20, and Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation so I may put them into them in a moment. That would have been really tough. A whole, millions of dead Israelites type of thing. And again, verse 22, Moses' humility here as a leader is amazing. And they fell on their faces and said, God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, will one man sin and you be angry with the whole congregation? And they understate the problem. Of course, a lot more than one man had sinned. But in truth, this whole blasted rebellion probably started with one guy being dissatisfied and murmuring and rounding up others and rounding up others. And that speaks to us that if we are in a position to intercede in these situations and speak up rather than let people simply keep mouthing the wrong stuff, it can make a big difference. So he said, so God said, separate yourselves. I'll put an end to this congregation. They fell on their faces and interceded. Verse 23, Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, speak to the congregation saying, get away from around the tent of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Moses rose up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, verse 26, saying, depart from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. And this is a point, it's kind of funny because people aren't listening to Moses and Aaron until it's like Yahweh's going to move, and then they have to make a decision. Let's see, who's got more spiritual power, Korah or Moses? And so when Moses said, get away, they went away. Verse 27, so they went away from the tent of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram on every side. People on all the tents around them just kind of moved away. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrance of their tents with their wives and their sons and their little ones. And this is a point where they could have humbly just said, "Wow, we're really sorry, we messed up." There's a chance for repentance here. There's a chance for change, and we want to make sure that people have that chance. That's one of the reasons that we talk to people and try to lead them to repentance. But in this case, they're going to be stubborn, they're going to be hard-hearted, and they're going to have their families with them. And so, verse 28, Moses said, "This is how you will know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works." By that, he means Yahweh has sent me to get you out of Egypt, to bring you into the wilderness, to make sure you're safe here, to make sure you're fed here, to do the things that you see me doing, to make sure this congregation stays together. Uh, Yahweh has sent me to do all these works, and they are not for mine own heart. I haven't lifted myself up. I haven't put myself in these positions. And that's what Moses is saying. And so at this point in time, then God gives Moses another revelation as to what's going to happen, what is going to happen in this case. It's pretty serious. We need to be aware of it. But what happened to Korah and Dathan and Abiram will happen to every person that rejects Christ. The wages of sin is death, Romans 6:23. John 3:16, that whosoever believeth in him will not perish, and those who don't believe in him will perish. And this is a microcosm and a lesson of what happens to people who reject God and his chosen leader, which for us now, the chosen leader is Jesus Christ. And so he says in verse 29, if these men die the common death of all men, or if they are visited according to the visitation of all men, meaning like they grow old and die, then Yahweh has not sent me. But if Yahweh creates a new creation, using the same word for create as we see in Genesis 1, when God created the heavens and the earth, bara. So if God creates a new creation, this is going to be something new, a new way of dying that hadn't happened yet on the face of the earth. But if Yahweh creates a new creation and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you will know that these men have had contempt for Yahweh. And it's interesting here to me that the part about the ground opening its mouth, because God is the creator of the heavens and the earth. And Psalm 24 does say the earth is Yahweh's and its fullness. Yahweh owns the earth. Yahweh runs the universe. And we don't get to make the rules. We have the privilege of obeying the rules. We have the blessing of following the rules and the peace and the blessings that come with that. But we don't get to make the rules. And the way the Hebrews expressed here that the earth opens its mouth, you can just see the earth is at the command of God. God created the earth. I was reading the Bible this morning with my grandson Colton. We were reading Joshua 10 about how the sun and the moon stopped. And somebody who didn't understand God and his creative power would say, well, that's impossible. You can't stop the sun and the moon, and everything would go flying away and blah, 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 blah. No, God is God. He is the creator. He spoke the universe into being. That's an inestimable amount of power. You can't put a measure to that kind of power. And so he creates the heavens and the earth, and here's the earth, and the earth is here, and it's God's, and it just goes and just eats them. I mean, that's exactly what happened. And so here, verse 30, if Yahweh creates a new creation and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you will know that these men have had contempt for Yahweh, which they had. Verse 31. And then as soon as he had made an end of speaking all these words, the ground split apart that was under them. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up and their households. And by the way, all the men that belonged to, should be just to Korah, and all their property. So the earth opened up and swallowed them up, and they and their families just disappeared. So verse 33, so they and all theirs went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed on them, and they perished from among the assembly. And this is, again, a microcosm of what is the future for people that reject God and Jesus Christ. And why do you and I need to be such aggressive evangelists? Because people that don't take Christ as Lord in this administration will perish. And we have a chance to present them with everlasting life. And so let's see. So, verse 34, then all Israel that were around them fled at their crying out, which is um, interesting. It shows you that it wasn't an immediate thing, not immediate in the sense of a tenth of a second, but when the earth opened up and they were going down, as they were going down in the earth, they were screaming and crying out, and then the earth, closed over them, and that was, and you'd have silence. But basically it's the Israel that were around them fled, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up, or lest the earth swallow us up. So everybody's worried about something that wasn't going to happen. Verse 35, then fire came out from the presence of Yahweh and devoured the 250 men who offered the incense. So they were not without sin, were not, were dangerous in standing against Moses. And God knew their hearts and just took care of them. And they passed away too in the fire. And again, a microcosm of what will happen to people who don't get saved. And this is the reality. Verse 36, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, that he take up the censers out of the blaze and scatter the fire in the censers, of course, at a distance, for they are holy, even the censers of those who sinned at the cost of their own lives. And we don't, not much you can say about that. When people sin and persist in sin and reject God, they do so at the cost of their own lives. And let them, the censers, be made into beaten plates for a covering for the altar, for they offered them before Yahweh. So they are holy, and they will be a sign to the children of Israel. And people will see the covering on the altar, and then they'll remember how the covering got there, what the covering is. And then they should remember this incident and keep in mind, who's God and who's not, who are God's leaders and who are not. And so they were made a covering, verse 40, to be a reminder of the children of Israel, so that no stranger, one who is not of the seed of Aaron, was to come near to turn incense and to smoke perfume before Yahweh, so that he does not end up like Korah and his company, as Yahweh spoke to him by Moses. And then as we read what happens now, and this is just astounding to me, on the next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron, saying, you've killed the people of Yahweh. It's like, really? Just, amazing spiritual blindness. Are we supposed to walk away with a lesson from this? Yes. Don't be astounded at people's spiritual blindness. Some of the things that happen in the world are so patently clear that they are from God or from the devil, if you've got spiritual eyes to see. But there are people that are just absolutely blind to spiritual truth. It is a reality. It's something we need to be aware of. It's elucidated here in this text in Numbers. So we can't be surprised when we run into that. And by the way, when you run into that, in my experience, there just aren't too many of those people that are that blind that really change. So we aren't surprised at spiritual blindness. We try to talk people, help people see, but we don't become discouraged when they don't see. So in verse 41, the children of Israel are complaining, you've killed the people of Yahweh. But then here goes Yahweh, verse 42, and he shows up over the tent of meeting in his cloud. Moses and Aaron, 43, come to the front of the tent of meeting. Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, verse 45, get away from among this congregation that I may put an end to them in a moment. Again, Moses and Aaron praying and interceding. And at that point, God must have showed Moses that the disobedience and the sin and the hard-heartedness of the congregation had opened up a door of the adversary, and a plague had started. And so Moses got that revelation. And then verse 46, Moses says there, and take your censer, put fire from off the altar in it, lay incense on it, carry it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them, which is the high priest Aaron could do. For wrath has gone out from Yahweh, the plague has begun. So Moses had to have gotten that revelation. Verse 47, Aaron did as Moses said, ran into the midst of the assembly. The plague had begun among the people. He put on incense, made atonement for the people, stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Verse 49, but those who died from the plague were 14,700. And then there were also those who died in the matter about Korah. Verse 50, then Aaron returned to Moses to the tent of meeting, and the plague had stopped. And so, because of the intercession of Moses and Aaron, and because of Moses' revelation and Aaron's speed and getting into the midst of the congregation and making atonement for them, that plague was stopped. And there's a lesson there for us too, that as leaders who get revelation, who have spiritual insight, a lot of times we're going to be called upon to move very quickly into people's lives to turn things around. And we certainly see that here in this record of Moses and the rebellions against him. So this is a very powerful and short, if you will, microcosm of how people who are complainers, who are murmurers, who have no real substance in why they're dissatisfied, but they attack leadership. They want to replace leadership. They are blind to the history and what's really happened in the world. They don't understand the spiritual forces behind. And God's leaders have to stay humble. We have to stay calm. We have to intercede. We have to do what we can to help people. That's the job of Christians, to step in and make sure that happens and not become discouraged and downhearted about the people that don't see the truth, but be thankful. And as Dennis's prophecy said today, to rejoice and rejoice again and look to heaven, because there are answers and we do have a calling, and we can do a lot of good for God if we will keep our heads about us and keep focused on the ministry that God gave us to do. So that's the record I wanted to share tonight. Appreciate y'all being here with me tonight. It's been a fun time, and the floor is wide open for anywhere we want to go with questions, discussion, points of interest.